Yeah, no, I definitely go back and look at stuff of mine that makes my jaw drop because I've forgotten like how harsh and wild it is. And, times change and I change. And I too feel that I have gone through this sort of shift in consciousness and what I describe as an awakening myself around 2017 is where I say it's interesting. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about that too, because you're talking about like how do you feel that there was a moment in time that there was just like a sudden onset shift in describe that moment for you. Was there like an event in your life that you feel like just made it happen?
And I was talking to Jimmy about this morning because I was trying to explain it happens differently for everybody, and I said to try to explain to somebody what that moment is or what happened in that moment is so insignificant to what actually occurs for the person that's experiencing it. So it'd be really hard to explain because everyone goes through, maybe it's a near-death experience. It could be something as simple for me as I was meditating on something and received an answer and a confirmation, and it was just something that it was so clear to me, and I don't know how to describe how it happened. But
well, I think what you're describing is one, you could probably pretty clearly describe the difference between yourself prior to that moment versus now. So I want to hear your perspective on that. But also, I think what you're pointing at with the moment, the thing that you feel is related to shift, it's like this event that could be something as significant as a death, but it could also be something as insignificant as I was in my car driving home. Because for me, it was this moment, like I remember the events. I went to go see Tim and Eric live in Washington, D.C. It was the second time I went to see them live. I saw them in Atlanta 2 years prior in like 3 years prior in like 2014. And it was incredible. Like it blew my expectations away because I was like, I love Tim and Eric. I can't imagine what a live show will be like. I don't really have much expectation. I'm curious. And I went in and it was like Broadway level performance, but it preserved their humor. And it was it was the most fascinating live performance I've ever seen. And it was genuinely hilarious. And they were on tour with Steve Brule. So they had John C. Reilly come out and do that character. It was an incredible show. And so I went into the second time. They were doing a 10-year anniversary Awesome Show tour, and I went to see them in Washington, D.C. And I had that same kind of expectation. And Tim and Eric have been like longtime heroes of mine since high school, maybe middle school. And here I was going to this, and I sat in, rather than being in the audience like it was the first time, I sat in these balcony seats. So already a disconnect there. And I was watching them, and rather than it being a bunch of new material, it was them rehashing re-performing bits from Awesome, which made sense because it was the 10-year Awesome tour. I'm not like knocking them for doing this. I should have known really what I was getting into. But the experience I had was uncontrollably very disappointing for me. And the drive back was very long. And I was not into listening to podcasts at all. I knew of Joe Rogan, and I had maybe watched at most 5 minutes because he had John LaJoie on in like his first or second year doing the podcast many years ago. That's pretty. And I knew he was a comedian. I knew the Carlos Mencia thing. That was the extent. But my friend Chad, who I was with, played a little bit of the episode with him and Henry Rollins, and so it was something in tandem with the disappointment of Tim and Eric show, listening to two interesting individuals have a unique conversation. Because again, podcast is pretty alien to me, like fairly in terms of consuming it. And then getting back and I was already starting to like question my habits, like smoking weed. I was a year out of the one relationship I've ever been in, and had gone through a very dark, depressing moment, and had this kind of moment where I was, I think everyone has some degree of suicidal thoughts through life, but I was feeling them very strongly at one point, and then just had this moment where it's like, if I really want to do it, then why don't I just do it? It's like, I clearly don't want to. So what is that about? Why don't I want to? And I got curious about that. And I got curious about consciousness. And I got curious about meditation. And so it was like all that preceding. And then this moment, that's where I feel like just through this 12-hour period, I woke up the next day and was just seeing life anew. And I was suddenly so interested in taking in information, like in whether it's not whether it's solid peer-reviewed scientific stuff or it's even the more ephemeral, like it's just people on YouTube speculating about sort of sci-fi concepts that could be like quantum suicide. You can never die if you're in a room where you click the bomb. You know, it's like you just shoot into another universe where you keep living, you know, like things like that. And just amalgamating this understanding of reality that it's like really waking up to your ignorance, really waking up to I don't know, and then going from believing in nothing from like a nihilistic atheistic sort of perspective to like I genuinely don't know, and it could be all of these things at once.
Yeah.
And that's how I describe the shift, and just the thing coming from a disappointment of a Tim and Eric show and listening to a little bit of Joe Rogan, it seems so stupid.
Yeah.
That's my things. So.
And that's why it's so hard to describe to someone too, because I think you and I probably, people who have gone through it understand. Like I could explain it to you and you would be able to receive it. But if I were to try to explain it to someone who hasn't been through it, then they wouldn't really grasp or really understand, because that's exactly what happened for me. And it was like after that moment, I went into like a good couple years of like pretty extreme solitude and exploring everything. I was the same way. I wanted to read everything. I wanted to know everything. I wanted to I couldn't even describe everything I saw was different. And I even like explained for the first like few months, I was actually a little scared because I felt like I knew something that could be like smelled on me or something, you know. It's like you're awake to something that you never really realized before, or you're like, you just feel like people know. Some people know. Like I was like really scared for a little while because my senses were super heightened, like colors, sounds, everything was like incredible. Like the sound of the planes. The first time I heard the planes go over, because I lived downtown after that, like the day after, I literally jumped to the floor because I thought we were getting bombed because sounds were that loud. It's crazy. It's a pretty wild experience, and people who have been through it understand, because I think it happens very similar, you know. I don't know how to describe it. Yeah. But I know that you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Well, to break down that description, I want to go back to like what words would you use to describe like what you were like prior to this shift? And then how would you describe who you are now in relation to that?
Gosh. I don't know.
And I know words are limiting.
Yeah.
So
I would say like you described, a little naive and very
closed.
Yeah. I would say I was open-minded. Like I'd always been kind of open to a lot of the topics that came up after that process, but I just did not see things the same way. I was much more willing to kind of understand why I have certain reactions to things, or just a better understanding of, I don't know how to describe it. It's like you all of a sudden understand. I know that I don't, but I feel like I understood the universe in a way that I'd never seen it before. I was like, wow. Everything is happening all at once, all at the same time. And it's like these ideas connected. I used to believe that, I used to talk about synchronicity before I actually went through like that awakening process, and then on the other side of it. And then I realized, I was like, oh, this is always like synchronicity is just you tapping into it for a moment, but it's always happening all the time in synchronicity. It's just whether or not you're in alignment to really kind of see that everything is so, I don't know how to describe it. It's really magical. That's what I'd probably say is like, I just, afterwards, I look at the world around me so much more like the magic that I believed in when I was a kid feels very real now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I almost like on that note about the comment about open-mindedness prior to the point. It's like, I mean, I would describe myself as fairly open-minded prior to that, but in comparison to who I was like after the shift, it's what I want, like that version of me to the other one was that you don't know what an open mind is. You really don't.
Yeah.
And what you're also like describing it to someone who hasn't gone through it, like that's a really impossible thing to do, because you can't,
there is no words for it.
Yeah, you can't will someone to understand it with words. They literally have to, because what we're talking about here, it's not intellectually graspable.
And you can't measure it. That's the thing. You can't like quantify it, measure it.
Yes. You know. It's a subjective thing, but I think it has everything to do. I really have adopted this idea of seeing the world as a story. like the way that we experience reality as a story. And I think that even to a skeptical, nihilistic, atheistic person, what I feel like the way to convince that kind of person about the significance of what we're talking about here, because most of those people would just be like, oh, this foo-foo bullshit or whatever. It's like, whatever, just any spirituality thing is garbage, like that. Yeah. But what I want to like say to them from like a more scientific, objective point is like, when you see the world as a story, that even from stories that are fictional, that they can move you and like motivate you. Like you watch something like fucking, I don't know, Harry Potter, and he, right. It's fictional, and he defeats an enemy, but that sort of narrative playing out in a movie can motivate you and move you in a way to go crush a task afterwards. Yep. And it can move you in that way. So like, if you view your life as a story, and you genuinely, even if like this awakening isn't an objective, measurable thing that happens, right. It's the believing in that narrative that it happens does in fact affect your thinking feeling and actions. Yeah. And that is real. Yeah. And that's pretty much like what I try to, the same argument I make with that type of person, because again, I went from middle school to this awakening moment of being fairly atheistic and nihilistic in terms of like God's bullshit concept is stupid, to suddenly being like, oh no, I'm stupid because to believe that there is definitely no God is in fact a belief. Yeah. It's a belief either way. It is. Yeah. And so it's I think really the essence of it on the nose is waking up to you don't know anything, and that all you do is believe things that you believe you know things. Yeah. And it's all belief. Even the objective scientific world, you are having faith in objective truth and reality.